Hello and welcome to WNHH Radio's Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make the Elm City tick. Nick Balleto and JR Romano keep New Haven and Connecticut ticking, especially this time of year. Nick is the chairman of the state Democratic Party. JR is the chairman of the state Republican Party, and right now, they're in the same room. You're here in the WNHH studio to update us on the state election campaigns that have now entered the home stretch. Welcome, JR and Nick. Great to see you guys.
Great seeing Nick again. We always have fun.
Great to see you.
I'm trying to share this. I'm
So, Harry, he says he's not able to share it. You want to give him a little hand there? Okay. So while we're talking about how to share the videos, we want to make sure that both camps get to see it. JR was having trouble over there. Okay. Yeah. So, guys, I want to talk mostly about the races for the state legislature and the governor's mansion, the statewide offices, because those are hotly contested. But one thing I'm noticing, are there really races for Congress and Senate, or have you guys, Republicans kind of sitting that one out? You know, I was noticing that Manny Santos is running against Johanna Hayes in the 5th, and he's only raised $50,000. And here in New Haven, this guy Angel Cadena is running against Rosa DeLauro, but not really running. He doesn't campaign. He's busy. He gets no money. The one thing he's done is he released a cartoon making fun of Rose DeLauro and you, JR, his state chairman,
for
not giving
fun.
him money. It was good fun. But what's the deal? Do you guys, I mean, I know that nationally both parties do this. They look at races where they have the least chance against an incumbent who has the power of incumbency in the war chest, and they focus on the races they think they can win. Have we just decided in Connecticut that we're a purple state government and a blue congressional delegation?
Well, generally, a lot of it stems from where the governor's office is, right? So if you go back a few years ago when Republicans controlled the congressional offices, we had the governor's mansion, and a lot of that stems from there.
When was that?
Yeah, well, you had Rosa DeLauro, you had Chris Shays, you had Nancy Johnson, you had Rob Simmons. But a lot of that stems from and I think Nick would agree, when you have the governor's office, it's a lot easier to raise money because that's essentially where a lot of that comes from. So does the governor raise money for congressional candidates? Well, but there's a bigger belief that you're going to be victorious, right? So Republicans, our greatest strength is our greatest weakness, which when I say that, we make an assessment early on whether someone can win or lose or whatever it may be. And so we then say, okay, I don't think this person is going to win, therefore I don't invest. Now, I think in regards to the Democrats, their greatest strength is also their greatest weakness. They believe no matter what that they're going to win, so they'll invest time or they'll invest money.
But wait, this is something both parties do nationally. They say, where are the races we have the most chance to
Right, but I'm talking about donors and activists. I'm not talking about necessarily the party apparatus. I think Matt Corey, we're seeing Murphy and Blumenthal's approval rating slide.
I was surprised that Murphy was only 15 points up, given how popular I thought he was.
Well, but again, I think a lot of it has to do with what's happening in the state of Connecticut. I think a lot of people don't appreciate how national politics and how all politicians are behaving. And so I think that's kind of where a lot of this federal stuff lies.
But, there's such a thing theory, JR, and you know more about this than I do, but it does seem like nationally there's more of a feeling that incumbents, once you're in for a few
88%
terms,
or something like that.
You raise so much money that you go for those. I thought both parties were going for those few battleground races like DeLauro. Even when you had a Republican governor, you still had both senators as Democrats. You still had half the Congress people as Democrats, and people like DeLauro were not challenged. DeLauro, ever since her first
it's also
two
a number of
races,
games. I mean, no disrespect. In John Larson and Rosa DeLauro's districts, I think Republicans and unaffiliated could vote twice and still lose by.
Okay, so that's why we're surprised about Manny Santos. That's an open seat.
Correct.
And you're only putting 50,000. What's that about?
Well, first of all, and I know Nick will agree with this. Nick, do you raise money for Chris Murphy or Joe Courtney or no? Nick raises no. Right.
So federal politicians are independent.
Right. One of the things I disagree with is on the national political campaigns, all the candidates, whether it's our state or other states, it's basically around issues, and the issues are what gear where the money's coming from and how much money they're able to raise. And I think the more the country's been upset, I think the candidates have done better. I think in the Senate race, the reason you're seeing a tie race is there really hasn't been a race. Corey has not shown up until recently. in the campaign for Senate. We really haven't seen anything from him. He hasn't been out there. But he hasn't been out there as like Chris has. Chris has been a tremendous candidate. He's working hard, but there really hasn't been a race. Half the people don't really know there is a Senate race out there. So I think that's one of the reasons you see such tight numbers, because I don't think people have been as energized as they see the governor's race, where they're getting bombarded by commercials.
And Nick, I'm going to ask you if you don't mind moving the mic a little bit toward me, so that when you look at me, we can hear you well, like pulling the mic out a little bit. Yeah. Because like with Murphy, and he'll tell you he wishes the system didn't work this way. I saw him speak at a conference on campaign financing. He raised money from day one. He said, I'm wasting too much time every day. They pull me across the street to raise for re-election as soon as I'm there. And so he has tons of money as a national profile. He was on the short list for vice president. He works the district. I know your slogan is working, not walking, and I'm not pro or anti-Murphy here. I'm just saying he's worked the district very hard since he's been in there. And it does seem like the incumbents are tough to dislodge when they've been in there a bunch of years.
Well, and the other thing that's frustrating, and I'm not going to divulge who the reporter was, but I got a call about some national security issue, and they wanted a comment, basically a Republican comment in response to what Chris Murphy had said. And I told the reporter, call Matt Corey, right? That essentially, and the reporter said to me, he's a window washer. What would he know? So essentially, the media will not, if they assess a race that they don't believe a Republican, they ignore the candidates.
But you know what? The media has done that forever.
Correct.
And what I love is that we have less power than we used to. So the media did not cover Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's race in New York, and that was the biggest upset in the country. The media,
I don't think it was.
The media said until 8:59 p.m. on Election Day 2016 that Donald Trump had a 99% chance of losing. I think you're right that we do that. I don't know that matters so much. You have so many independent ways of getting your message out if you want, like Bernie Sanders on Facebook when he started out, when the press wouldn't cover him. That's how he got big. Trump with his tweets.
Social media by far is the new way, and that's what's getting the message across the country. And that's
so
why
doesn't
people
disagree with JR about how we act.
I think people come together around issues, and I think it gets all back to issues, and people are getting excited and energized around the issues. And I think the best issue for us across the country is Donald Trump. And what he's done. And I think that's what's energizing Democrats and activists and people who we've never seen before have been coming out in droves for the last 2 years.
Now, is that personality? Is that issues? Is it because Donald Trump really insults people and acts boorish, or is it because they don't agree with him on tax cuts and immigration and trade?
I think it's tax cuts, trade. I think trade is just absolutely ridiculous. I think tax cuts, people are going to see that tax cuts did nothing except for the rich people throughout the country. It did not trickle down to anyone, anywhere, any place in this country. I am a tax accountant. I see it. There is no money in the middle class. It's very tight for people living every day from day to day. So these tax cuts have done absolutely nothing. And people are going to see that next year when they get their tax.
Well, unfortunately, though, Nick, what we know is wages are rising because of the tax cut. I mean, we know that.
Rising,
for example,
an exaggeration. They're inching up.
Well, but they're still rising, right? I mean,
but separate from
regardless,
Trump, the way the economy has changed is that real wages did not rise for about 20 years.
Right? But understand, you can't. I mean, it's like turning around the Titanic, right? We've had a stagnant economy for 8 years, and regardless of whether you want to admit it or not, GDP's up 4%, which Obama never managed to hit. You have a situation where, and again, I know the stock market's fluid, so I'm not going to simply sit here and say, oh, Trump, the stock market's because of Trump. But we have the record lows of unemployment. I know that in Connecticut, it's not happening because we have bad policies here in Connecticut. So essentially what's happening is the growth that's happening around the country isn't being felt here.
Frank Romano gives a thumbs up, and Kathy Wood Polity says that's a lie. The tax cut helped most everyone.
He's not saying it's me. He's saying it's Nick.
And that's absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. You see the middle class. I have clients that are mostly middle class clients that are business people all over the state of Connecticut. Actually, all over the country.
Again, in the state of Connecticut.
But it's all over the country, and they don't have money. I have clients from all over. I probably represent 25 clients in 25 states, and they don't have money.
I mean, the numbers here are that the vast majority of the tax cut benefited the people at the highest income range, and that
but the people
most
who
of
are
money
paying
did not
the
get
most,
reinvested into jobs.
But again, that's not a fair assessment because we have low unemployment. You cannot make that distinction. Now, of course, if you pay the most in taxes, a tax cut, of course, will impact those that pay the most. And what we're seeing, again, 4% GDP growth, that's true. We're not making it up. And what's interesting about the trade policy, you think higher tariffs are bad. You think putting tariffs on foreign goods are a bad thing and haven't worked for us?
I think you're going to see it become very difficult over time, and it's just
like
just starting to
the
kick
price
in.
of steel's gone up, and that's hurt construction.
Now, the price
of everything is going to go up.
Well, yeah, but what's fascinating about you listen to Democrats who complain about higher tariffs, and essentially tariff is a tax on a foreign good. So you recognize that taxes are bad. Now, Trump is using it as a negotiation tactic to renegotiate trade deals. And here in Connecticut, you hear we need to tax more on cars. We need to tax this. We need to tax this. And there's no admission that taxes are, in fact, bad and raise the price of goods. So I find it so ironic that you hear Ned Lamont and all these Democrats talking about how bad tariffs are, but yet raising taxes on everyday items in our state, no big deal. It's good for us. It's good for the government.
No one's ever said that, JR. What they've said is we got to find a way to deal with the budget of the state of Connecticut, whether it's to even out car taxes across the state, or it is uneven, for especially people in cities that are paying a fortune for car taxes.
So do you think there's 5% waste, fraud, and abuse in the state of Connecticut? Do you think 5%?
JR, when you say that, it's ridiculous. And I don't. And
so you don't think there's...
I'm not saying there might not be waste and abuse in the state of Connecticut. And I think no matter who the governor is going to have to look at every position, and no matter who gets there, whether it's your candidate or mine, is going to have to look at across the board,
Nick,
every position and everywhere in the state. Everywhere across the state of Connecticut. So I think every position, everything's on the board. But what you're not saying is across that budget, almost 2/3 of it is spent on January 1 at midnight because it's obligations and other things that you're not going to be able to cut unless we're going to default on our obligations across the country.
You mean so the bonding, which you guys love to bond money. And shout out to Toni Harp, who, when she was a senator, tried to bond out money to improve the Communist National Party's headquarters. But we bonded money for a splash pad.
National Party's headquarters. Well, it's what people said on House Street is not the Communist National
Party. So anyway,
once again, you're wrong. But
again, do you think we should have bonded money for a splash pad?
Wait, where did that come from, by the way? How did that get in here?
It's true.
Because you guys are like into this beat up Tony Harp mode. This collection, she's not running.
Well, no, because it's the epitome. But it's the epitome of the Democratic Party.
They only run against people. The Republicans only run against people that aren't running for office. As you know, this whole campaign is based on people that aren't running for office. Let's talk about the real issues. You had the governor's office for 20 years.
And you've had the legislature for 30 years.
And you couldn't balance a budget to save your life.
Well, again, Nick, as you know, the legislature
bonded $1 billion in debt.
The legislature controls the purse strings that you don't want to take ownership to the Connecticut General Assembly, which has been controlled by Democrats for 30 years. They control the purse strings. If you're a teacher out there and you're upset that your pension's not funded, blame the leadership, which is the Democratic Party. Martin Looney
absolutely not true. Absolutely not
Nick,
true.
So
you've
the
had
Democrats
20 years
of a governor, and you've controlled the legislature. Who controls the purse string in the state of Connecticut?
The Senate's been 18-18. Did anything change?
This year it's been 18-18.
I'm saying, right.
It absolutely changed because of the Republican bipartisan budget, the cuts that you guys made to local education funding was restored.
The Republican budget that was presented did
restored
not balance.
Local funding.
It didn't balance and it didn't work. That's why they had to start from scratch.
Okay. So,
I got to admit, I absolutely love this, and I hate to say that I have to interrupt people to remind them that they're listening to Dateline New Haven at WNHH 103.5 FM live, StephenNewhaven.org. And the two gentlemen you're listening to are Nick Balleto, the state Democratic chairman, J.R. Romano, the state Republican chairman. Silvana Apicella says every little bit helps. Kathy Wood Polity says that, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, J.R. Romano is making sense. Andrew Semmel tolls her taxes and will hit the middle class the hardest. Thanks, folks, for listening in.
So, Nick, here's a great story for you. Let's talk about a company that benefited in the state of Connecticut from the tax cuts that's actually moving out of New Haven because it's too expensive to be here because of property tax, and they're moving because they have more money in their pocket, and they're moving their company to Brantford. Now, I know that.
Who's that?
Well, I'm not going to get into the company because I don't want them to get attacked, but I know this for a fact.
No,
because
they don't get attacked.
You may not attack them.
No.
But the nature. I'm not saying the radio. Listen,
is it true?
It is absolutely true.
Okay, give us their initials or what they make.
It's what they do is they have to do with organic fruits and vegetables and things like that. They're a supplier. They're moving out of New Haven because it's too expensive to do business here because of property taxes and again, talking about Tony Harp.
Now, property taxes, the state does say that the state only returns 30-something% of payments in lieu of taxes. You don't let us tax our property, so we have to charge twice as much because half it's off the rolls. And then both parties have done this. Both parties have done this.
Right, but
we get back only a third of what we.
So you're saying that the cities of New Haven, Bridgeport, and Hartford effectively spend the money that they raise. That for example, when you look at some of the decisions,
I would say that any government you can look at and say $4,000 here was misspent, even $50,000 here. But the big picture is that, and that's done in small towns too, Democrats and Republicans, and I do that for a living, see where they don't spend their money well, and I agree they spend it very well in Brantford. But the big picture is the tens of millions of dollars every year that the suburban-dominated legislature steals from cities because they don't allow us to tax our property. They don't give us permission to add on to the sales tax, but they do only return half of what they promised by statute.
Now, what do they get in terms? What
did
New Haven get in terms of percentage of the education budget? It's not as though New Haven doesn't get a significant amount of money.
It's still so much less than what you stole from us through the tax system.
I doubt that that's true.
Unfortunately, JR, he's right.
It's not even close.
He's very right.
So how much money a year does New Haven get in education funding from the state of Connecticut?
I don't have the exact
numbers. Is it 50% of the budget? Is it 75% of the budget?
No, it's close to 50% of the education budget. But that's still a lot less than the whole grand list. We can't tax 54% of our grand list because of state rules. But
you're talking about New Haven, Yale, and things like that.
Yeah. We really need to get back to the general election that's happening this year, not New Haven. But let's just talk about New Haven. New Haven provides all the services for the entire county. We don't have a county form of government, so everybody leaves. Everything to service everyone throughout the county gets done in New Haven, and all the rest of the towns leave New Haven alone, by themselves, to fend for themselves. And we don't get the coverage. We have the hospitals. We have the homeless shelters. We have the education centers. We have the low-income neighborhoods. We take care of all that here in New Haven. And that's what we provide. We provide services.
So other communities don't have hospitals?
Some do. Not a lot in this region. You finally have one in Guilford, but that's the closest.
You have one in Derby. You have one in Milford.
I'm talking about, okay. Right. But we don't, it's a little different.
You can't compare the level of social services in city and town.
Absolutely.
Well, no, but there's a need here. I mean, I'm not arguing that New Haven doesn't have a need.
The need is a region. You want to drive to Branford and say there's no need and there's no region. That's why leveling out taxes on cars for property makes sense.
Right, but again, the problem that I have, Nick, and this is what it's not fairness, because what ends up happening, it isn't fairness, because what happens is you have local government officials that have no incentive to operate effectively. Because ultimately what they're doing is they're spending on programs that, look, here's the problem with social services and the way that we view them. They're not outcome driven. There's no program that incentivize the employees, the state employees, the city workers to get people a better life. Because what it's all about is more money for their program, more money for whatever they're doing. Because if you end these social needs, someone may lose a job. So what happens is we have fundamentally don't incentivize the right thing to help people. I truly believe that. I'm not saying that these needs don't exist. I just think we don't do an effective job actually helping people.
I think that's unfair. You come from a union family. Your father was a union worker also.
No, my mother was a union teacher. My father was not. My father was in and out of my life through alcoholism and things like that. But
my father was a union worker his whole life, and that's where I came from, a lower middle income family. And I'm not going to allow you to insult those people that work for the city and the state, because there's a lot of them that work hard.
I didn't insult them. I'm talked about.
Well, you said they don't provide the services to people, and they need to do it more efficiently.
The incentive isn't what it should be. The worker should be incentivized to help people get to a better life. That they're living in the system. It's not a product of what they're doing wrong. It's that we reward these nonprofits or these grants through the more people that are in need, the more we give. Instead of saying it, the more people you get off public assistance through success and through careers, that should incentive. That's what the incentive should be. That's not how it works. And I'm not saying that.
So Mr. Stefanowski's plan of just erasing the entire budget and starting from scratch and making children and seniors compete for Medicare costs and education costs.
That's not what he said.
That makes sense. Yes, it does.
By the way,
we're going to
referring to Bob Stefanowski, who's the Republican governor for candidate, who said he's going to wipe out the income tax, which has 50%
in 8 years, not in a year.
First he said it originally, then he said no, not for the first 2 years.
Well, first of all, look, I've been paying attention to the Republican primary for a long time, and this is a complete misquote. Bob forever has said phasing it out. I know a lot of times people want to kind of exaggerate, but he talked about an 8-year goal. And look, here's how I view it. The state of Connecticut, the people in Derby, Connecticut, and New Haven, Connecticut, and Guilford, Connecticut cannot afford more taxes. And ultimately, that is what you're going to get with Ned Lamont. That is what you're going to get.
That is not true.
He's not going to do tolls?
That's not true. Tolls? We're going to do a study and see what happens. Yes, he's talking about
he has said we're going to do tolls on trucks. He's already said it.
But it was okay for Mr. Stefanowski to make millions of dollars putting in tolls all over the world when he wants to make his investments. So I don't really trust Mr. Stefanowski on his position on tolls.
What his company did
one tolls? Of his companies, they input tolls in India when he was investing. It was one of his major investments. I believe it was $100 million.
So JR is the Republican platform tolls for
India.
But
again,
yes, they can do it in India, and he can make his own money personally, but not do it here.
But hold on, Nick. Let's be very clear.
Let's get back to. I'm going to almost call you a liar in one point, and I hate to do this to you, but I sat through the yesterday the forum at the retail association, and your candidate got up there and said specifically he was erasing the budget and starting with
zero-based balancing.
Is that right? And by doing that, makes everyone have to compete for every single dollar. So you're putting seniors, education, healthcare, everything gets erased, and everyone's going to have to start and scrap for every single dollar to get funded for their programs.
He's talking about
zero-based budget saying we're going to still provide those services,
correct,
but make the union, for instance, compete with other private contractors to see who can do it best. Because I know that this was pioneered in Indiana. It was a Republican governor, but it was a bipartisan idea that government services can go to zero-based budgeting, where unions often continue to get the work, but they have to compete with private contractors to continue to get their work.
What he said is everyone is going to have to do that. Every department, every agency, everybody here in Connecticut is going to have to do that.
And like
so
every
household, health, education, housing are all going to have to compete against one another to make sure they get there.
I'm glad you say that, Nick. So this is how zero-based budgeting works. And I'm sorry, you're an accountant, so I'm surprised at this. So what happens is like just like your house, you say, okay, we have our paycheck, our month. Here's what we earn a month. What's the most important thing? We got to pay the mortgage. Done. So in your case, Medicare and all the things that you're talking about are important, so they get funded. Where we're going to analyze is, let's take, for example, the fact that Ned Lamont lacked the courage to join your House Speaker, Joe Arasimowicz, in condemning this nonsense director of culture. He literally refused to...
Let's go back to zero-based budgeting.
But this is exactly the point, though, about zero-based budgeting. Because you're going to go to the Arts Commission, and they have a position that is vacant right now called the Director of Culture. It literally sounds like a position out of the Communist Manifesto. And they're trying to fill it before the general election, where Joe Arasimowicz said, not a good idea.
And the Republican version of that, I think Mrs. Anaskowicz held under the Republican administration.
I don't care.
But what Lamont said, if you're going to quote my candidate, let's talk about it.
Ned Lamont's the Democratic candidate.
Right. And Ned Lamont did not say that. What he said is, he likes arts, he supports arts, but we're going to have a decision, whoever the new governor is going to be when he gets office, and then he'll make a decision.
Did you read the quote?
Yes.
Are you really making a big issue about like Arts Commission?
Right. I want to talk about people's health care and education.
Right, and it's funded.
And what's at risk. What's at risk?
Done. Funded.
Your lieutenant governor candidate is probably the most despicable person to ever walk under that dome in Hartford. And you don't want to talk about it, and you just want to hide him around. He's against women's rights, women's issues, health care, LGBT rights.
Hold on.
We're going to talk about it.
You had a candidate who was snapping photos of women under the skirt photos. How dare you say that? You had a Democrat state representative snapping photos of women under their skirts.
I just shut off your microphones for a sec. Time out.
How dare you?
Time out. Okay. Nick brought up something I'd like to have our listeners understand what you're talking about and pull it away from the personal. Joe Markley's lieutenant governor candidate. He's the Republican lieutenant governor candidate. I happen to know Joe Markley. He's a wonderful person and a very sincere person. He has extreme conservative views. They're the most extremely conservative views by anyone who has ever sought state office. Okay, Joe Markley's have a radio show here. He's a very good man. His views are the extreme right. I'll give you a few examples, okay? And let's talk about this. And tell me if this represents the Republican Party, because I do think that Bob Stefanowski has hidden Joe Markley under the bed for this campaign because of these views. Whereas I think if Joe Markley were out there, people would actually connect them and we could actually debate these views. Joe Markley's views include he was the only senator out of both parties to vote against a yes means yes affirmative consent law for sexual assault on campus. He wants to ban fluoride with the John Birch Society position that it's bad, it's a communist plot. He was the lone senator to vote against a pay equity bill, which did become law from both parties. One of only four Republicans, he and four Republican senators voted to allow a law against allowing the Dreamers, the foreign-born kids brought here legally as kids, access to institutional aids that is paid for by their own fees. One of only two in the Senate who voted against a plan for climate change resiliency. He voted against protections for senior citizens who contract for reverse mortgages. And he voted against a bill, now law, from both parties, which removes firearms from gun owners who are subject to temporary restraining orders. Now, I would argue, Nick, that Joe Markley is a very sincere conservative. I've talked about him with his issues. He has legitimate arguments for this. And JR, I would argue that this is so far to the right of both parties. Without talking about who's good people or bad people, what does this say about the state of politics in our state and this campaign?
Well, I think where the mischaracterization of Joe as a person is just utterly ridiculous.
Let's stay away from that.
I understand that, but listen, you want to talk about policies, fine, Nick. But at the end of the day, when you have, and again, there's legitimately people who have done really bad things in that building.
Off. Let's talk about
no.
these
But this needs to be said. that type
JR,
of
how many of your
rhetoric.
state chairmen went to prison? Do we want to talk about this? How many Republican state chairmen went to prison? I mean, you want to talk about people in the parties?
I'm not the one that said. That's my point, Nick. I didn't say that. You did.
I'm just saying.
So
you're
look, when it comes
to
to Joe Markley, he's a strict constitutionalist, and most of the arguments that he makes in regards to this legislation has to do with the constitutionality.
Joe Markley's not saying he wants women to get raped. He's not saying he wants people to get shot.
Now,
but these are very far right positions.
So, and that's basically what it boils down to. When Joe Markley talks about these issues, it's very professorial about the Constitution, right? And that's how he firmly believes. He's
worried about overreach and whether they're going to accomplish the goals they set out to
Correct. So the difference, I think,
so
for
basically,
Republicans,
if you're a woman, you're screwed because he wants to read the Constitution. That's what I get from how Joe Markley voted. And I'm not attacking personally. From his voting record, if you're a woman, if you're a child, if you're LGBT, you're screwed because he wants to read the Constitution.
So let me ask you a question, Nick. This goes from the perspective of how Democrats view everything and how Republicans view everything. Joe Markley is one senator that has a particular view. Republicans don't give litmus tests and demand that we all think exactly the same.
If you win, he's next in line to be governor. So Bob Stefanowski,
right? And listen,
and we've seen this in our lifetime.
The lieutenant governor and the governor. As much as Nick would like everyone to believe, the governor doesn't wave a magic wand and create law, right? It's done through the legislature. And I think and I could certainly sit here and list some of the radical things that you have in your party, talking about abolishing ICE, talking about all these things about one elected official that feels that way. But the reality is that I think what happens here is that you have Democrats who want to keep their base highly agitated and angry in order to drive them to the polls.
But
and I get it.
You don't think it's fair to bring up the views of a person your party is nominated
I'm not saying
to
that,
be second in line to take the
I'm not saying
office?
that. But what I'm saying is that the way that they're communicating and describing Joe as this monster.
Right. Let's get past that. He's not a monster. He's a good human being.
Right.
But let's talk about the views on the
when
ticket.
when you provide an opportunity for Joe to talk about the constitutionality of some of these, because we do have a constitution, Nick, that actually has protected women. Right, we do have a constitution that has protected minorities.
Do you agree with Joe Markley
if he read
in
it?
his positions?
That's not the way if Joe Markley reads it. They don't.
Again, that's an unfair assessment. I think
we disagree on that. We disagree on that position.
Where Joe Markley
I haven't read all
the
I haven't read all the legislation, but I will tell you that.
Would you have voted for yes means yes?
I probably again I didn't read the full legislation.
Ban fluoride.
But sometimes I will tell you this: I've had conversations with
equal pay for equal work.
That's already a law, Nick.
But he didn't vote for it. I'm just saying, would you vote for it? How do you not vote for that?
That's already a law.
How do you not vote for it?
Because it's already a law. So
he was the only voted against it. So
it's illegal to discriminate in that way. It's already illegal. A lot of these, and this is where we boil down to the Constitution.
You had a candidate for Congress last night that says marriage is between a man and a woman. I mean, where are we going with your party? Are we going backwards?
What do you mean marriage isn't between?
That means he's saying gay marriage shouldn't be legal.
Well, no, I personally, I think. First of all, I don't think we should issue marriage licenses. I don't think. I'm more of a I have no issues. Marriage is a religious sacrament, and if there's a religion out there that wants to say marriage is between a man and a woman, great. But these are things
not
the government.
A religious sacrament when IRS recognizes it for certain benefits and views, and so should the state.
They should.
So unfortunately, it's not.
But that's
I think what JR is saying is that he'd be for civil unions that anyone can get regardless.
Anyone can do what they want.
I don't
care. And if we're going to give a benefit to one group, we have to give. That's the Constitution. If we're going to give a benefit to one, we have to give a benefit to the other. But here, let me ask you.
You should explain that to some of your candidates because that's not quite the position.
But anyway, what about?
But I'm not.
But JR, why are you guys hiding Joe? Why is Bob Stefanowski why is it the Bisowitz Lamont ticket and ads and public appearances? And I mean, it is true that Joe's really on the way right of where the state is on those very issues I mentioned.
Let me
He's to the right of your
listen.
party.
I get that we're here in the New Haven Independent, and all this conversation wants to be about Joe.
No, I'm not just making all. I'm just saying.
We've just spent about 20 minutes
because you guys started
because you were too far on New Haven, for God's sakes. We're talking about the election that matters and why people are talking.
Because this is a New Haven-based podcast, or I mean,
correct.
Let's be
but
fair.
We're talking about the state election cycle right now.
Right. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fact.
Let's
talk about the fact that what this election breaks down to two things. Either if you vote for Ned Lamont, you're voting for higher taxes.
Absolutely not. Just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
A toll isn't a tax. A statewide property tax isn't a tax.
Ned Lamont said he's going to put everything
right. So higher taxes, where we have another candidate who's dedicated, saying we will not raise taxes. So what it basically boils down is you have and by the way, this is what I fundamentally. Let me ask you this: how is it 4 years ago, the same party that literally it was so extreme on Tom Foley's wealth, and how evil it is to be wealthy and all these terrible things about how wealthy Greenwich.
Self-funding a campaign.
He didn't self-fund in 4 years ago. But he did in 2010. No, I know that. Okay. Why is it? How do you explain that transition from it's horrifying to have Tom Foley, this Greenwich billionaire, be the governor, but now it's okay for Ned Lamont. Explain to me how.
I will explain to you. In retrospect, Tom Foley doesn't look so bad compared to Mr. Stefanowski.
We're talking about Ned Lamont, though.
No, let's get back there. Mr. Stefanowski is invested in companies where children were dead by people practicing on drugs and doing drug trials.
Let's talk about that, Nick. Okay,
let's talk about that. So he does that.
So the company was defrauding investors.
Right, and he
didn't realize that they were doing that.
Okay, but he's a manager. So what's he going to do?
He was on the board, wasn't he?
Not in the company. He was on the board of a company that did an investment that they were unaware that this company was doing.
And
this
then
they
there was
got
also
caught.
the payday lending, right? That's illegal.
Let's talk about payday lending. Let's talk about that. Ned Lamont personally profited from payday lending. Did you know that?
No, he did not. His wife, and they produced stuff that they did not.
Oh, so his family, his car, everything that he had, he invested in.
She did not. Her investments were not in that, and she was very clear in the statement that her investments were not in that. Somebody else in the company that she was with did,
but it's her company, right?
No.
So, Nick, is it fair to blame? Is it fair to blame Stefanowski to be on a board that has a large portfolio that has to deal with stuff that comes up?
If you want to be manager of Connecticut, I would think so.
Okay, let me
You're
just
overseeing it.
You
have 100. Okay. Let's talk about this. You got 50 departments in Connecticut. If something happens in one of those departments, is the governor not responsible? If it continues and it goes on,
okay,
right, and then you fire people.
If DCF is there and it continues and the governor doesn't do anything about it, are you not responsible?
Okay, but he did.
You are responsible.
Absolutely. Once the information comes forward, you are responsible.
Well, after kids are dead, that's a little too late.
You want to? Okay, let's talk about DCF. How about that? You can't have it both ways.
You didn't get to answer your original question. So why Democrats have said for years that is the political system needs to not just have wealthy people buy nominations and with their own money run for office because they're rich. And the 1% has been a big issue, the income inequality in our state. I think what JR is asking is why this election cycle are the Democrats running someone who's put already $12 million into his own campaign, is self-funding, and basically bought the nomination. Have the Democrats changed their opinion about how that issue fits into income inequality and what the two parties stand for? Is that your question, JR?
Basically.
Yeah. Okay. I just think that our best candidate rose to the top. We had a bunch of candidates in a primary. We had a very, as you did, very forceful primary.
You had a felon and a billionaire.
That's not true, JR. Let's not talk about felons.
You had he's not a felon?
But before that, I had 15 candidates in the race up until a month before that. It came
but
down.
The primary came down to the felon and the billionaire.
JR, you had a city governor as a felon twice.
Right.
John Rowland
not while
twice.
Exactly.
Correct, but not while he was in office. He didn't win after he was a felon.
But like
if you met John Rowland and had his choice and there was a chance he could win again, he would certainly run again. Okay. And he would run for Congress.
Time out once again. I do have to. I love you guys. I got to. Let's just remind people they're listening to Dateline New Haven at WNHH 103.5.
Roasted times. The first felon and a billionaire.
I've had to turn off.
Sounds like a kid's book.
103.5 FM live. CNewhaven.org. I'm sorry we can't get to all the comments because our commerce boards are lit up, but I will tell you that our Facebook live thread appears to be conservative and our YouTube thread tends to be more liberal. We have Joanne Eller saying Christine Pollock, let's talk about far left of Republic. The Democrats went, Thang Ewan said, constitutional law to protect the children, women, 100 children for the first time. I forget.
Where's Seth Poole?
Where's Seth Poole? You got Julia Gambelli Goose say GOP is backwards and ICE has been successfully abolished in other states or large cities because it is overreach. And Christopher Millardo says, I still need convincing to vote for Bob. And unfortunately, I can't scroll down, but on Facebook Live, there were about 20 comments saying, go JR. You got it right. So that's what you guys. And we're talking to the state Republican and Democratic chairman, Chair Romano, and Nick Balleto. So what do you believe in the polls that this is too close to call, this race for governor and control of the House and Senate, that Lamont's a little bit ahead, but given, maybe up to 8 points, but given how unpredictable elections have been in recent years, it's basically either can win?
I think Nick would agree. If Lamont was really up 8 points, he wouldn't be doing as much negative advertising. And I'm not saying that as a disparaging way, but that's generally when you're an operative. Like, he didn't run any negative against Joe Ganim because he knew he was going to win, right? So generally when they're still negative, and that goes.
But yet Stefanowski's running positive, although the the Governors Association is funding negative ads. Not
I think it's a dead heat. I think every vote's going to count.
What do you think, Nick?
I think we learned 2 years ago that we take nothing for granted, that the only poll that matters is election night at 8:01. And I think we learned that the hard way.
850,000 unaffiliated voters, twice as many than there are Republicans registered in the state, and a couple 100,000 more than there are Democrats. Who are these voters?
In fairness to both of us, one of the problems is by when you register at Motor Voter and some of these other places, you have to go out of your way to check the box. You don't check unaffiliated. So if you don't check anything,
but all over the country, Nick, people are less affiliated with parties.
That's a trend
but it's
happening.
Also right. But it's also the same way. A tremendous amount of that number, though, is people just not making a choice and just registering to vote. You have to pick one or the other. Well, so if you don't pick anything, you are unaffiliated.
And to be fair, just to make sure I was reading from both sides, Ayers Yosemite says a small lead at a deep blue state tells me it's a dead heat and Democrats are nervous.
Well, and I would just want to bring up the motor voter thing. And Nick, I know you're going to agree with me on this. I love getting the questions from the reporters like, what does this mean? It's like, it's because they're checking the box off at, like, this isn't.
No, they're not checking the box off.
No,
That's
meaning to vote. Meaning to vote. Like, they're like,
right.
What does it mean? 75,000 people read. This is never seen before.
Right.
Because people are asked. We
never had motor voter.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and I think that in terms of when, and I explained this to one of the reporters, the number of Republicans.
That's why we're getting such, because we've had a lot more people register to vote than we have.
But it's all because of motor voter.
We actually were probably 49th worst in the country for quite some time. And this new program has gotten us back up there. And so,
that's not a criticism on my part.
No, I'm just saying. And what happens is now we've gotten the program. Now motor voter is there. It's working, and the system's working like most other states in the country.
And Julia Gall's just gone on. This time she moved over to Facebook, so on your territory, and said if someone is going to be doing an interview that is viewable, maybe they shouldn't be smacking their lips with gum. Which one are you chewing gum?
Oh, okay. It keeps me calm.
So what about these voters?
For a minute.
So you guys have answered my first question about why there's so many more now, which I hadn't known, which is very interesting. I hadn't seen that in the coverage. You guys teach me a lot every time you're on.
And by the way, the party registration has stayed about the same as what it was.
Well,
compared.
More of the young people are registering Democrats, 16,700 versus Republicans, 6,000. But more than half of these new voters, 28,000, are registering as unaffiliated. Nick, you believe that's because they don't figure it out because the way they're being asked? Or I would see it the opposite way, because no one who's registering is telling them to vote in a party.
Correct. You don't know. Neither one of us know who's registering because they're doing it in motor vehicles. So it's not like the old form where somebody went to their door, knocked on their door, and asked you to vote.
Some of that's happening
or,
too.
Getting the mailing. So there isn't a lot of that. And that's the big difference. Registration is completely done differently than it had been done for years, and that JR and I probably both grew up learning how to do. So it's much different today. And it really is that if you don't pick a box, you just automatically become unaffiliated.
But I would also point out,
it's not a choice.
I would also point out that right now, particularly amongst millennials, affiliation is bad. And I'm not saying politically. I'm saying in general. Right. The largest growing, I think in the U.S., one of the largest growing churches is, the non-denominational. You don't have, the Elks clubs are struggling to get met. Like everywhere is struggling to get these members to be a part of association or to kind of declare. And I think that's also a product of you're seeing more and more people go to this unaffiliated because they don't want.
Do you think we've lost something? Like, Nick, you've been involved in party politics since the 80s. I covered you when you were New Haven alderman back when they were called aldermen. A lot of people have said, and I've written articles this way, saying it's great to be independent of parties, party machines, trade patronage, but is there something we've lost by not having people as united around ideas and groups of, platforms and organizations that get people to polls, even if it's not done in a pure way?
I think part of the problem is people have not had a lot of time, and I think we saw this before. People are very busy. People our age, JR's to my age, have kids, have families, are at the soccer fields, so they didn't have time to get involved.
He was working in a union, was working all day and then going out to stuff at night. I mean, people are always busy.
I think it's worse. I think you have a lot more two families working. My mom didn't work back then when we were children. Mm-hmm. She was a housemaker, and she, raised us. So it was a little different. There was a little bit more flexibility. Today you have two families who have to work to survive, and the kids are all over the place. So it's very different, and they don't really have the time. That's why it's amazing to see, at least for us, for the last 2 years after the Trump election, we've seen a tremendous amount of activism, and mostly from women, actually, but have come out and have been really working hard and fighting, giving and dedicating their time. And it's much different than I've seen in the past. It's starting to turn around a little bit, and I think people are joining the party and want to be involved and want to identify with something. Absolutely.
So JR,
I also think we're competing.
We have you're about 20 years younger than me and Nick. How old are you?
I'm gonna be 40.
Oh, actually 12. He's only 12 years younger than me. I'm 52.
You're only 52. When I covered you, you were only 22 when you were an alderman.
You have to rub that in. Thank you. Yes.
That's great.
Oh, okay.
I think you were a superstar. Nick was elected when he was just out of college. I'm 58. So I'm really interested in what JR is saying. I'm interested in your perspective about the Change New Party, but I was listening to JR, and I was hearing maybe a little more insight because he's from that generation about why people aren't affiliating, because you don't seem to have the same theory that it's about how busy they are.
Well, but slightly, it's also you're competing, right? So, and even when I grew up, we didn't have travel soccer. We didn't have like all of these things that people compete for entertainment value.
Kids are more programmed now. But as Doug Ray pointed out in his book about New Haven City, The End of Urbanism, he called it civic density. For the adults, though, you were in a union, you worked at factory all day, you're part of the bowling league or the theater club that night, and you always had your bridge club. People were really busy with civic stuff as grown-ups in a programmed way, unlike the kids today.
Well, but I'm going to go back to the fact that kids are more... Parents are more involved in the day-to-day activity of their children, and I'm not saying that as a criticism, but between the travel soccer or this game or
there is some criticism. When we were kids, you kind of like had the ability to just have free time and
absolutely
explore the world.
I mean, but I can honestly say I know my mother went to all my games, but didn't go to every practice, and I think there's a lot more of that.
But life is different. I mean, or at least my parents would throw me out. When the sun came up and didn't want me to see me home until the streetlights came on, and I got a wiffle ball bat and a ball, and I was gone all day. And if I had
come
to
back
call
with scrapes and bruises, they wouldn't even ask.
They didn't ask, right?
Right, I remember that. Yeah. William Espinal says blindly following a party, no matter what, has been hurting progress. So that's kind of the thinking out there.
I would agree. I mean, I think we should be challenged.
But
I think I should be challenged. I think people, even in my own party, and I tell
let me
people
challenge something about your party. Okay, in this election, have the Republicans already won the debate that we need to cut taxes? Because there's a whole wing of, even though JR keeps calling you guys communists, I would argue the opposite.
I've never called Nick communist.
Well, but you're saying Democrats are extreme and everything.
Some are.
There are a lot of intelligent Democrats who believe that taxes have not been our problem, that we did not lose GE because of taxes. In fact, they went to a higher tax state because they invested through the state government in a tech infrastructure. Aetna, they're not leaving after all, but they went to New York. But before we get there, there are plenty of Democrats who believe that we should raise the taxes on the wealthy, who believe that, of course, we should do tolls. You don't need a little study. But the two candidates for governor from the major parties are arguing about who will really lower your taxes and which ones. So Stefanowski, the Republican, says, I'm going to cut income taxes. Lamont says, that's ridiculous. That's way too much money. I'm going to cut property taxes, and I'm going to give you a $250 tax for small business, and somehow that's going to get rid of that, and somehow that's going to help businesses thrive and not add to the deficit. Aren't we just having a Republican argument this year in this debate?
I think the difference is because both of them are businessmen, so they do understand some of the complexities of what business is going through in the state of Connecticut and some of the confusion. I think all three of them agreed yesterday about getting rid of the business entity tax right away.
That's the one I want to figure out. That makes me nuts. What business is going to go out of business because of paying $250?
But it's anybody that has an LLC. So people that even have a home, if you buy a rental property and have to put an LLC for protection, you pay the $250. So no matter what you do.
But Nick, is anyone going on? Is there going to be a single business in Connecticut that goes out of business next year because it had to pay $250? And if so, is that a viable business?
It doesn't generate a lot of money, and that was
$15 to $20 million. We have a $5 billion deficit. If we can't, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Okay.
If how are we going to solve a $5 billion 2-year deficit problem if we can't even hold on to $15 to $20 million that cutting it will make no difference to the economy?
I'll give you that if that's where you want to go on the $250.
No,
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
The bigger issue is
why they
but the bigger issue I think becomes is that nobody that we know or have seen believes that Stefanowski's plan is sustainable, doable, or workable, and that is the real argument. Saying I'm going back to a piece of paper and I'm going to erase everything on the paper and start from scratch is great, and I think that's an idea to use, but it doesn't work. In reality, it doesn't work. Anybody who's ever served a day in government knows that doesn't work, and needs to learn that you're not going to be the wizard when you become the governor. The governor is not the wizard. He has to work with the other branches of government, and anybody that has seen working with the State House and the Senate and working together with everyone to come up with a complex program that's going to work for the state of Connecticut. So no matter who becomes governor, either one of them, it's going to be a difficult job on day one, and they're going to have to sit there and roll up their sleeves and make some very difficult decisions. And I just don't think anyone believes clearly that's ever served a day or has been involved in government, and that's the big argument, that Stefanowski's plan will work.
I got that.
And he's living in a dreamland.
Before JR responds, why are the Democrats arguing that they can really cut taxes when you have this huge deficit. Is that an honest argument? Is that different from the Republican argument fundamentally? I get while it's different in specifics, you're saying they're cutting the wrong taxes and too much.
Well, I think there's issues that we have to look at the revenue side in Connecticut. I think that's part of the issue. If we can't bring up the revenue side, then that becomes difficult. But I think one of the huge items is that all the people that order stuff online every day and our sales tax is not collected. One of it, it's very unfair for retailers in Connecticut across the state.
So tax online commerce, is that something you would agree with?
I think Bob actually said he would.
So that's something we actually agree on.
Yeah, I believe we all agree on it. And that if you raise the revenue, I'm sorry, Jay, if you raise the revenue on that side, it does give you some complexity in some areas too. And I think that number is going to be astronomical, especially myself, where you order stuff online every day, and I think we all do now. I think it's just become custom to our age and our age group.
My pants are so baggy.
Yeah, it happens so much more. It's just so easy because we just don't have time, and we do it quickly.
So I think 2 points, and Nick, I'm going to tease you a little bit here because you just admitted that the governor can't act alone, and yet you want to throw the $2 billion deficit at Roland and Rel, understanding that the legislature has more control over that. So I just wanted to point that out for the listeners that
the governor does have a line item veto and can veto the budgets, which they did not. So that's why I throw it back.
Well, Rel
on them.
had
if you
the
take
Democrats,
the drastic, if
well,
you took
Nick,
the drastic,
I didn't interrupt you.
Right.
When Rel was governor, they had a veto-proof majority, and they vetoed her. They overrode her veto on the budget. So, but let's just move on to Bob. Look, at the end of the day, what everyone needs to understand is we're literally arguing over who's going to be the better tax cutter, the Republican or the Democrat. Right. So anyone out there understands that the better tax cutter is going to be the Republican. I think it's disingenuous for the Democrats to talk about this because they're not actually cutting taxes. They're kind of rejiggering the formula to take revenue from this side and make it this way, but I'll cut this and I'll do this. It's not going to work. It's not about...
Long-time Democrat, I brought that argument to him, and here's how it came back to me. I said, I'm not a Democrat or Republican, really. I said, I believe what Nick just said, that you really can't talk about solving this without raising some revenues, but no one seems to be able to really say that because it'll be called a tax. So I said, at least Stefanowski is sincere. He believes in trickle-down economics with, he's buddies with Art Laffer, who was a completely discredited economist from the Reagan administration. Even David Stockman, who carried out his tax cuts, said we didn't believe in it. But he believes it. So I said, Stefanowski believes it, and he's running for governor as a tax cutter. He believes it. Lamont does not believe he can speak honestly about stuff he used to speak honestly about how we do need tolls.
Because the polling came back bad. Correct.
So his argument was, does that mean, therefore, you vote for someone who has an unrealistic plan that is so much bigger, cutting taxes when you have the big deficit? Is that a really...
Well, but again, I think the problem is always the argument for Democrats, and I think the best way that I can explain it is and I love HGTV, watching like the fixer-upper shows and all this stuff. You have to have a vision for what it could be, and I think Democrats have difficulty seeing what could be. So, for example, if you start... And I talk about the 5% waste, fraud, and abuse. That represents $1 billion. If you were to give $1 billion tax cut to people in this state, the expectation is that our economy would grow.
Yeah, I think George Bush called that voodoo economics.
Well, listen, at the end of the day...
all the statistics
you
say
guys
that
can
money does not get
that...
reinvented productively back in the economy. We now have, since the Reagan tax cuts in the Laffer curve, we now have 38 years of data that says the money does not go back into creating jobs. It goes into increasing personal wealth.
Just like Trump's tax cut.
Right,
but Trump's tax cut.
Again, you guys can't... But the argument is being disproven because the economy is growing at 4% GDP. You can't have it both ways. The data says otherwise, even though you keep saying and repeating the same thing over and over again. At the end of the day, for the state of Connecticut, we need the economy to grow, because when the economy grows, you get more tax revenue. And right now, our economy in this state is not growing. And this is my favorite.
But one can argue that the states that invested more money, let's say in infrastructure and in tech infrastructure, with tax dollars, they grew more.
But respectfully, I don't disagree with that. The problem is the Democrats in this state don't spend wisely. They invest in things that, like $2 billion in corporate welfare instead of building roads and bridges. So, and again, Nick, this is just where philosophically we're going to disagree. You can't be in charge of the candy store for 30 years and say, oh, we need this now, when you failed as
JR, you had governors for, now I'm going to jump in. You had governors for 20 years, for God's sakes. So we'll take the last 8 years, yes, we had Democratic governors, but you had it for 20 years beforehand. 20 years.
And you had the legislature.
And you also implemented the state income tax that we're fighting over. It was a quasi-Republican governor, but we'll go back and forth.
That was a Republican.
Yes.
He did not win as a Republican. He left the party and was an independent governor. He was not a Republican.
But he was about as Republican as you could get.
That's not true. He hated Ronald Reagan.
But what you look at is clearly people have to make the hard decisions. And Democrats, when we get there, are going to make the decision. And I hate to say it this way, but I'm going to say it. We're going to do it with a heart. And that's the difference. We're going to worry about people's health care, education, and try to protect cities from falling apart and collapsing to make sure that they have the services and what we can provide. It's going to be a difficult job no matter who gets there. But we're going to try to do that to make sure. We're not going to do a Donald Trump or a McConnell and try to cut out health care and leave people hanging in the streets. We're going to make sure we try to do it with a heart, and that's what this is about. And that's the difference in way of doing it. I think that's completely
disingenuous, Nick.
No, I don't. I don't see it. How is it disingenuous? Because look at your Republicans on the national. I mean, Stefanowski's the one who wants to put his arm around Trump. I mean, it's very clear on the national level. But again, this guy doesn't have a heart. Your president doesn't have a heart. And he's pretty clear.
Those are opinions, not fact, right? So what I will say is that how can you say you have heart when in my town of Derby, Connecticut, people are struggling over one of the highest tax burdens in the country? That is money out of their pocket that they can't put into a college savings account. They can't pay off their mortgage. They can't buy a car. That's not heart, Nick. Simply taking more money from people in the state isn't heart.
But you're not being honest. You're arguing the same point. The tax cuts have affected nobody.
That is not true.
The rich are getting. It is true. The rich are getting richer. This absolutely. The Trump tax cut. You could read 1,000 articles today if you bring them all up.
From the Huffington Post, I know.
But no, not from the Huffington Post. From pretty much everywhere. Trump's tax cuts have made the wealthier much wealthier. And that's where it's gone.
Made everyone wealthier.
Absolutely not. JR, I'm an accountant. I got 800
You're
clients.
You're in Connecticut, Nick.
I got clients from 25 states.
Okay, guys, we're about to wrap up here. Let me ask you about Oz Griebel. He's the third-party candidate, usually third-party candidates, except for the one who was elected, Lowell Weicker.
Lowell Weicker had a party infrastructure because he was a Republican as a state U.S. senator, things like that.
Yeah. He has 11% in the latest poll, Oz Griebel. Typically in elections, a third-party candidate registers much higher in a poll a month before than he gets or she in the general election, because everyone kind of then goes back to the two parties on election day. That, like Ralph Nader, was it something like 10% went to one, under one. Is Oz Griebel going to be a factor, and if so, how?
I think what's unfortunate is that for Oz Griebel, this is a complete exercise in ego. He's not going to win. He just wants to kind of be there. His support isn't going to explode over the next 2 weeks.
So what's going to happen? Is he going to have 11%? Well, or is he not going to be a factor?
From what I've seen, some of the internal, it's actually a pretty even split between taking from Ned and taking from Bob. So he's going to be essentially, if you want lower taxes, you want Bob. And so if you're voting for Oz, you're essentially voting for Ned Lamont. And I would think Nick would make the same argument, because we've seen the similar data. But what people that are watching this or listening need to understand, Oz Griebel knows he can't win. He's just doing this because it's an ego stroke for him. He likes to be talked to by the press.
It's not building an organization.
No, he just wants to be in front of the camera.
But
he wants to be interviewed.
He's quite good in his interviews, I think.
Yeah, I think.
I'm not saying
but
it's all with the guy.
Listen, it's all vanity for him.
You could be great when you have nothing to lose.
Right.
And that's what I said yesterday watching Oz Griebel. He does the energy, he does the excitement, he says what he wants to say and do what he wants to do, but he's not really sure what he's going to deliver and how to get there. I don't think so. I actually think he's a much a different choice to Mr. Stefanowski than he is to Lamont, only because of a lot of the similarities on the issues when I listened to him yesterday. So I think if you didn't like Mr. Stefanowski for whatever reason, you would look to go towards him. I think he's less like our candidate. I don't see.
Well, there's a lot of Democrats that don't like Ned's wealth or style or
same thing that you have in yours in your party. So I think it's great to be the guy who has nothing to lose, and you just go out there and you say what you want to say.
Well, we had nothing to lose. It's everything to gain today on Dateline New Haven, hearing from GOP State Chair J. Romano, Democratic State Chairman Nick Balleto. Thanks, guys, for coming on. I think you did a great job. I loved listening to you, and I think we learned a lot from it. So many people weighed in, and I just want to apologize I didn't get to read your comments, partly because they were so interesting and partly because technologically I was actually battling with my station manager to be able to scroll up your comments to see them. So people can go to the Facebook Live and YouTube and see what folks had to say about this. So thanks to our guests. Thanks for listening. And remember, everyone, vote November 6th.
Absolutely.
I want you to vote.
Thank you.
And both of you keep up the work in getting people involved in politics. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Fly free with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.